Chapter 30. Without Grabtronics, the cycle reacted like any normal motorcycle would when falling onto its side at very high speed. Which isn't a good thing. I was immediately ripped free, the cycle skidding out from underneath me as my leg hit the ground and the friction pulled me backward. Megan wasn't so lucky. She got pulled under the cycle, its weight grinding her against the ground. It collided with the wall of the tubular steel corridor. The tunnel wavered, and my leg burned with pain. As I rolled to a halt and things stopped shaking, I realized that I was still alive. I actually found that surprising. Behind us, from an alcove we had driven past, 2 men in full enforcement armor stepped out of the shadows. There were some small, faint lights ringing at the edge of the alcove. By that light, I could see that the soldiers looked relaxed. I swore I could hear one chuckling inside his helmet as he said something over the comm unit to his companion. They assumed Megan and I would both be dead, or at least knocked out of fighting shape, by such a crash. To calamity with that, I thought, cheeks hot with anger. Before I'd had time to think, I'd unholstered the pistol under my arm, the pistol that had killed my father, and unloaded 4 shots at nearly point-blank range into the men. I didn't aim for their chest, not with their armor. The sweet spot was the neck. Both men fell. I breathed in a deep, ragged breath, my hand and gun shaking in front of me. I blinked a few times, shocked that I'd managed to hit them. Maybe Megan was right about handguns. I groaned, then managed to sit up. My reckoner jacket was in tatters. Many of the diodes along its inside, the ones that generated its protective field, were smoking or entirely ripped free. My leg was scraped badly along one side. Though it hurt fiercely, the lacerations weren't too deep. I was able to stumble to my feet and walk. Kind of. The pain was rather unpleasant. Megan! The thought came through the daze, and, stupid though it was, I didn't check to see if the 2 soldiers were actually dead. I limped over to where this fallen cycle had skidded up against the wall. The only light here was from my mobile. I pushed aside the wreckage and found Megan sprawled beneath, her jacket in even worse shape than mine. She didn't look good. She wasn't moving, her eyes were closed, and her helmet was cracked, only halfway on. Blood trailed down her cheek. It was the color of her lips. Her arm was twisted at an awkward angle, and her entire side, leg up to torso, was bloodied. I knelt, aghast, the cool, calm light of my mobile revealing horrible wounds everywhere I turned it. David? Tia's voice came softly from my mobile, which hung in its place from my jacket. It was a miracle it still functioned, though I'd lost my earpiece. David? I can't reach Megan. What's going on? Megan's down, I said numbly. Her mobile is gone. Shattered, probably. It had been attached to her jacket, which was mostly gone also. Breathing. I have to check if she's breathing. I leaned down, trying to use my mobile screen to catch her breath. Then I thought to check for a pulse. I'm in shock. I'm not thinking right. Could you think that when you weren't thinking right? I pressed my fingers against Megan's neck. The skin felt clammy. David, Tia said urgently. David, there's chatter on the enforcement channels. They know where you are. There are multiple units converging on you. Infantry and armor. Go! I felt a pulse. Shallow, light, but there. She's alive, I said. Tia, she's alive. You have to get out of there, David. Moving Megan could make things worse for her, but leaving her would definitely make things worse. If they took her, she'd be tortured and executed. I pulled off my tattered jacket and used it to wrap my leg. As I worked, I felt something in the pocket. I pulled it out. The pen detonator and blasting caps. In a moment of lucidity, I stuck one of the blasting caps on the cycle's fuel cell. I'd heard you could destabilize and blow those, if you knew what you were doing, which I didn't. It seemed like a good idea, though. My only idea. I took my mobile and attached it to my wrist mount. Then, sucking in a deep breath, I shoved aside the broken motorcycle. The front wheel had completely been ripped off, and lifted Megan. Her broken helmet slipped free, falling off and cracking against the ground. That made her hair cascade over my shoulder. She was heavier than she looked. People always are. Though she was small, she was compact, dense. I decided she'd probably not like hearing me describe her that way. I got her up over my shoulders, then began an unsteady hike down the tunnel. Tiny yellow lights hung from the ceiling periodically, barely giving enough light to see by, even for an understreeter like me. Soon my shoulders and back were complaining. I kept on going, one foot after another. I wasn't moving very quickly. I wasn't thinking very well either. David. Prof's voice. Quiet, intense. I'm not leaving her, I said through clenched teeth. I wouldn't have you do something like that, Prof said. I'd much sooner have you stand your ground and make enforcement gun you both down. Not very comforting. It's not going to come to that, son, Prof said. Help is on its way. I think I can hear them, I said. I'd finally reached the end of the tunnel. It opened onto a narrow crossroads in the understreets. There were no buildings here, just steel corridors. I didn't know this part of town very well. The ceiling was solid, with no gaps up to the air like there were in the area where I'd grown up. Those were definitely shouts I heard, echoing from the right. I heard clanks from behind, steel feet pounding against the steel ground. More shouts. They'd found the cycle. I leaned up against the wall, shifting Megan's weight, then pressed the button on my pen detonator. I was relieved to hear a pop from behind as the cycle's fuel cell blew. The shouts rose. Maybe I'd caught a few of them in the blast. If I was really lucky, they'd assume I was hiding somewhere near the wreckage and had tossed a grenade or something. I hefted Megan, then took the left turn at the crossroads. Her blood had soaked my clothing. She was probably dead by... No, I wouldn't think about that. One foot in front of the other. Help was coming. Prof promised help was coming. It would come. Prof didn't lie. Jonathan Phaedrus, founder of the Reckoners, a man I somehow understood. If there was anything in the world I felt I could trust, it was him. I walked a good 5 minutes before I was forced to pull up short. The tunnel in front of me ended in a flat wall of steel. Dead end. I glanced over my shoulder to see flashlights and shadows moving. No escape that way. The corridor around me was wide, maybe 20 paces across, and tall. There was some old construction equipment on the ground, though most of it looked to have been picked over by opportunists. There were a few heaps of broken bricks and cinder blocks. Someone had been building more rooms down here recently. Well, those might provide some cover. I stumbled over and laid Megan down behind the largest of the piles. Then I flipped my mobile to manual response. Prof and the others wouldn't be able to hear me unless I touched the screen to broadcast, but it also meant that they wouldn't give away my position by trying to contact me. I crouched down behind the bricks. The pile didn't give me complete cover, but it was better than nothing. Cornered, outgunned, with no way to... Suddenly, I felt like an idiot. I dug in the zip pocket on my trouser leg, fishing for my tensor. I pulled it out triumphantly. Maybe I could dig down to the steel catacombs, or even just dig out to the side and find a safer path. I pulled on the glove, and only then did I realize that the tensor had been shredded. I stared at it with sinking despair. It had been in the pocket of the leg I'd landed on when falling, and the pouch had been ripped at the bottom. The tensor was missing 2 fingers, and the electronics had been shattered, pieces hanging off like eyes, drooping out of a zombie's sockets in an old horror movie. I almost laughed as I settled back down. The enforcement soldiers were searching the corridors. Shouts, footsteps, flashlights, getting closer. My mobile blinked softly. I turned the volume way down, then pressed the screen and leaned in. David? Tia asked in a very quiet voice. David, where are you? I reached the bottom of the tunnel, I whispered back, holding the mobile up to my mouth. I turned left. Left? That's a dead end. You need to... I know, I said. There were soldiers the other directions. I glanced at Megan, lying slumped on the floor. I tested her neck again. Still a pulse. I closed my eyes in relief. Not that it matters now. Calamity, Tia swore. I heard gunfire and jumped, thinking it was from my position. But it wasn't. It was from the line. Tia? I hissed. They're here, she said. Don't worry about me. I can hold this place. David, you have to. Hey, you! a voice called from the intersection. I ducked down, but the mound of bricks wasn't large enough to hide me completely unless I was practically lying flat. "There's someone over there!" the voice shouted. Powerful, enforcement-issued flashlights pointed in my direction. Most of those would be on the ends of assault rifles. My mobile flashed. I tapped it. "David," Prof's voice. He sounded winded. "Use the tensor." "Broken," I whispered. "I ruined it in the crash." Silence. "Try it anyway," Prof urged. "Prof, it's dead." I peeked over the bricks. A large crowd of soldiers was gathering at the other end of the hall. Several were kneeling, with guns pointed in my direction, eyes to scope. I kept low. "Just do it," Prof ordered. I sighed, then pressed my hand against the ground. I closed my eyes, but it wasn't easy to concentrate. "Hold up your arms and walk forward slowly," a voice shouted down the hall toward me. "If you do not show yourself, we will be forced to open fire." I tried as best I could to ignore them. I focused on the tensor, on the vibrations. For a moment, I thought I felt something, a low hum, deep, powerful. It was gone. This was stupid, like trying to saw a hole in a wall using only a bottle of soda. "Sorry, Prof," I said. "It's busted up good." I checked the magazine on my father's gun. 5 rounds left. 5 precious rounds that might be able to hurt Steelheart. I'd never have the chance to find out. "You're running out of time, friend," the soldier called toward me. "You have to hold out," Prof said urgently. His voice sounded frail with the volume down so low. "You should go to Tia," I said, preparing myself. "She'll be fine," Prof said. "Abraham is on his way to help her, and the hideout was designed with an attack in mind. She can seal the entrance and wait them out. David, you must hang on long enough for me to arrive." "I'll see that they don't take us alive, Prof," I promised. "The safety of the Reckoners is more important than I am." I fished at Megan's side, getting out her handgun and then flipping off its safety. Sig Sauer P226, 40 caliber. A nice gun. "I'm coming, son," Prof said softly. "Hold out." I peeked up. The officers were advancing, guns raised. They probably wanted to take me alive. Well, maybe that would let me take out a few of them before I fell. I lifted Megan's gun and let loose a burst of rapid-fire shots. They had the intended effect. The officers scattered, seeking cover. Some fired back, and chips sprayed across me as bricks exploded to automatic weapon fire. Well, so much for hoping they wanted to take me alive. I was sweating. Hell of a way to go, eh? I found myself saying to Megan as I ducked around and fired on an officer who'd gotten too close. I think one of the bullets actually got through his armor. He was limping as he jumped behind a few rusty barrels. I hunkered down again, assault rifle fire sounding like firecrackers in a tin can. Which, as I thought about it, was kind of what this was. I'm getting better. I smiled wryly as I dumped the magazine from Megan's gun and locked a new one in. "I'm sorry to let you down," I said to her mobile form. Her breathing had grown more shallow. "You deserve to live through this, even if I didn't."